One of the most important aspects of being a successful project manager in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry is your ability to be agile and adapt to different things. In this episode of the Engineering Project Management Podcast, I'm thrilled to have with me Karen Ditz, project management professional, and Phil Tunnah, licensed professional engineer, both big-time players in our industry, both with Stanley Consultants, both with a ton of PM experience. And they're here to share some very specific strategies that you can employ to become more adaptive, more agile, and just more effective overall as a project manager in our industry. Before we jump in, quick word from our sponsor, Stanley Consultants.
For over a century, Stanley Consultants has been at the forefront of engineering innovation, relentlessly committed to improving lives and building a resilient future. We collaborate with government agencies, utility providers, and private industries to solve some of the most complex challenges in energy, infrastructure, and more. We put people first, leveraging cutting-edge technology and multidisciplinary expertise to deliver differently and exceed expectations. Be a part of our journey to create a connected, sustainable, and enriched world for all. Get in touch with our Stanley Consultants team today.
All right, now I'd like to welcome our guests onto the show for today, both from Stanley Consultants. Karen Ditz is a project management professional, or PMP, and vice president, and Phil Tunnah is a licensed professional engineer and operations director. Karen and Phil, welcome to the Engineering Project Management Podcast. All right, so I'm going to ask you both to start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your role at Stanley. So Karen, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I have been working in the A&E space for about 20 years. I started as an environmental consultant in London, and after about a year or 2 years, I was fortunate enough to get moved to New Zealand with a large global engineering firm, continued doing contaminated site work and due diligence, and helped Shell clean up some of their contaminated site projects. And then from New Zealand, I went to Canada. And then from Canada, I came to the US, and that's really where I started to work on these mega projects, these large programs that span multiple years, and really started to see planning, design, and construction activities in full swing. After nearly 15 years with that one company, I had the opportunity to take a more strategic role at Stanley. So my role at Stanley has been focused on working with the CEO and being part of a transformational team focused on strategic initiatives to move the organization forward. So as I look back on my career over 20 years, I've been fortunate enough to work in multiple continents, countries, and meet many people along the way.
That's great. It's always interesting to hear about someone who has a background in more of a technical field that gets into strategy and project management, because I think it's not natural for us from a brain perspective, but it's something that can definitely be exciting and we can kind of grow into, and we'll get into that today. So thank you for that. Phil, how about you? Tell us a little bit about your role at Stanley.
Yeah, so I'm the operations director, and I get to oversee the engineering and the planning that basically makes up that organization. But my career spans back, it's now 34 years. So I started in the UK as well. I'm a civil engineer, and a lot of the design build work was coming out in the UK at that time. And I got to manage, multi-year programs of work for Southern Water and Thames Water, and then got the opportunity to come to the US and bring that design build experience here, and slowly built on program size and project size, managing two $1 billion programs really back to back. So these are 7 years each. Really exciting work, because you get to work really closely as a team and really focus on the deliverables. And then got to work as a utility owner for 5 years, basically running a utility, all the engineering, all the planning, all the GIS that goes into a utility organization. And then I got the opportunity at Stanley to really invest all that energy into building their technical and delivery parts of their business. So pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it sounds like you both have gotten involved with a lot of very interesting and exciting projects, both from kind of the engineering delivery side to the more strategy, high level aspects of the organization. So excited to get to pick your brain a little bit here today. And Karen, I'm going to start with you. Stanley is a fast growing company, and we're in an industry right now that's fast growing. I mean, infrastructure is kind of failing everywhere. There's lots of exciting projects going on. How critical would you say it is to maintain consistent project delivery practices, and talk about the impact that has on the success of your projects as an organization?
When we start engaging with clients, we cannot emphasize enough how important it is to establish these fundamental project delivery practices and processes when embarking on a mega project or a program or portfolio of projects. The benefit to the client is there's coordination across multiple entities within the organization, there's increased accountability across the delivery teams, and there's consistency around decision-making and transparency, which obviously helps the executives make more informed decisions at accurate times during the delivery life cycle of a project or a portfolio of projects.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that one thing I'll say to that is we do a lot of work with firms like, building custom project management development programs. And, every project is different, but that doesn't mean that you can't have things that you do consistently on these different projects. Like one tool that we like to help some of our clients use is 13 questions, we call it. Like at the beginning of a project, you go through these questions with your client. So you understand everything that's within scope, right? And you could chart your project out accordingly. Now, the 13 questions is a relatively straightforward list of questions. But the thing is if you forget to ask one or two of them, it could be a really bad thing. So just the idea of having consistent practices across these projects so that you're making sure you're touching the same points, you're making sure your team knows the scope, et cetera, is so important regardless of the size of the projects. And so I don't know, Phil, anything to add to that from your end?
The scaling of consistency. So even if you're on a small project, the principles are the same. So we've got experience on, large billion-dollar programs. I think Karen and I would both say, focus on the principles at the small end, and then you're able to grow in your career, and you'll find the consistency is amazingly similar, just the numbers get bigger.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's really important to be agile. Every client organization is different, and I know some people think you can box up an approach and take it from project to project or from client to client, but the ability to, really understand your client's business drivers and objectives really early on and work with them in a partnership approach to come up with that framework and those consistent practices and processes, regardless of the delivery method that they use to deliver their projects or their portfolio of projects or their program, just having those critical points of interaction during the project delivery life cycle is really important.
Yeah, and that's a good point in that, you both mentioned it already, right? Projects are different in terms of sizes and clients are different in terms of goals, et cetera. So you're dealing with obviously a lot of variables there. So consistency to me is even more important in situations like that. And I want to follow up on this next question, kind of building on, what Karen said there. And Phil, I'll start with you on this one. In terms of like client business drivers, I mean, I think in consulting, what you're trying to do is provide the utmost value to your clients. I mean, that's really one of the goals of what you're trying to accomplish. And when you think about the client business drivers like growth, regulatory compliance, and infrastructure challenges, how does program management, when you're thinking, bigger now a little bit, address these needs?
Yeah, I think it's, having been on the owner's side, I think is a great gift as an engineer to be able to kind of reflect back. It can be overwhelming when you're facing these challenges of aging infrastructure, regulatory drivers, consumer trends, just the way that they use the product of, water, wastewater, gas, electric. We're all driving more efficiency, so we're selling less units. And as a utility owner, you have to run a business based on that, with an expanding territory that is never in the right place for where you want it as an engineer. So, we never get the growth exactly where you want to expand your service territory for your utilities. So there's some huge pressures. And really, as part of an owner team on the utility side, we were faced with, those annual capital investments. So really everything has to fit into the annual budgets. And really those corresponding costs also have a capital and an operation and maintenance part. And the staff is so busy and so dedicated to their communities that really having an opportunity for a consultant to step in and bring project management support to that kind of environment, I think is a real exciting moment for a utility. For a large utility investment, so sometimes they have to do a large project like build a new water treatment plant or expand parts of the electrical system. And so in those cases, you can build a program management approach, bring in your skilled resources and support that for the program needs. Or what Karen and I have done is just literally lean in, bringing staff augmentation. And so you're really supplementing the owner resources. You're bringing skilled staff in to work as an extension of the owner. That enables the owner to kind of kick off various initiatives, cross-train their staff, and then the objective is the program staff like Karen and myself would exit out knowing that, there's a new initiative moving forward with the owner. Again, it's all the principles that we talked about before, Anthony, that are just really exciting.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say for those of you listening that aren't that familiar with program management, one way to think of it is if you're working with a large client, let's say it is a utility in this example, and they have a series of projects that they're going to work on, either that are active or that they're rolling out, they have a plan. Program management, you can be thinking about a portfolio of projects that you're helping them execute on. And I think it is. And then that consistency again comes into play because now you're even doing multiple projects with this client. And that's where it's so important. And you want to be able to carry the value through on every project in the same way, right? Because it doesn't matter the size. They're not all going to be exactly the same size. But again, it's that consistency that's very, very, very important. So I think that's something for everyone out there to think about. So Karen, you mentioned client business drivers before. We talked a little bit about them. Is there anything else around other client business drivers or other ideas around that or challenges for program management that you want to mention or that you can talk to?
Sometimes we find the client doesn't know exactly what solution they need. So when we talk to our clients and our counterparts in the business and we're trying to help come up with a solution, I think there are three main drivers that are specific for a programmatic approach, meaning is a program approach or this consistent way of managing a portfolio of projects the right way to help? So as Phil mentioned, I think growth, regulatory drivers, and then infrastructure challenges. So based on our experience, there's some challenges that we look for in a client organization to really say, okay, is programmatic approaches and framework and methodologies really the best way to look at this problem? So backlog of aging infrastructure, as you just said, multiple projects in a portfolio that are interrelated, or one mega project that has multiple packages within that. And really there's a driver around cost, schedule, and other factors that really come back to efficiency and good project management practices and procedures that will help get to the objectives that the client's looking for.
Yeah, I think that this is really, really important and definitely worth just highlighting a bit here, which is understanding the specific needs of the specific client, right? And kind of being flexible and agile and adapting to those needs. I think that I was talking with a couple of people this morning about a project, and we were talking about the idea of, as a project manager, in a sense, you can kind of take the approach of being like a doctor, where you have to diagnose the situation before you're just, giving them a prescription for something specific, right? So like at the beginning of your projects, you have a kickoff meeting, whatever the case may be, and you can really understand their pain points, their urgency on this project, what are they trying to solve here? And while you want to be consistent in your efforts, which is really important, you can't turn like a blind eye to just keep going through your process and don't think about what the client specifically needs in that situation. So, which I think is tricky because a lot of us, at least technical professionals, we're very rigid and very structured, and we want to go through the steps and check off the checklist. But, we may need to add an extra thing into our checklist for one client because they have a very specific need or they have a very specific situation. And so I think that's definitely a takeaway so far from our conversation that I hope PMs listening can think about is, yes, be consistent. Yes, have your checklist. Yes, go through your 5 process groups. But, make sure you put a little bit of a client spin on it for each client, depending on what they're looking to do. In these larger projects, you're going to have more stakeholders, right? In the beginning of the project that you're going to be interacting with. You may have the client, but you might have the people who live on that street, or, who live who are around the bridge or the bike path or whatever you're working on. And those considerations need to be taken into play as well. So go ahead, Karen, you have something on that?
Well, typically what Phil and I have done over the last few years when working with clients, you can call it a quick start, you can call it a mobilization, you can call it ramp up on an onboarding, but essentially within the first 60 to 90 days, really understanding what the client drivers are, what the objectives are, how they want to structure their team, what are the roles and responsibilities and the accountability within that team, how much levels of authority do they want to pass down to the project managers within that team, and really collectively come up with an approach that effectively delivers these projects within the portfolio, within the program, so that we can monitor the progress accordingly.
Yeah, 100%. And to me, that's why people skills in project management is so important. When we do our programs with our clients, you got your three-legged stool, your scope, schedule, budget. What we always try to do is put a foundation under the stool that says people, and make sure that, you need to be training and upskilling your PMs on how to interact with people. Because if you can't interact with people effectively, build those relationships, get to know your clients and other stakeholders, you're not going to be able to manage the scope, schedule, and budget effectively. Because to manage those things, you got to have these sometimes not so easy conversations, right? And we're not even going to get into kind of scope creep and other issues like that today, but those are challenging. And so kind of to stay on this theme of people, I want to go back to Phil here for a second here. And Phil, you mentioned before that you worked at a utility, which I'm sure is very helpful when you work with utilities now. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the idea of, or the role that empathy is in understanding kind of the challenges that are faced, for example, in this case, utility owners, but just generally speaking, like clients in general or other stakeholders, how that it can influence your approach as a PM.
I think it's really amazing. I got back in my career, Anthony, so I'm a chartered civil engineer in the UK. A qualification that's actually quite hard to get, and you have to. So that civil engineering back then, they got their charter in 1828, and they defined civil engineering as the art of directing the great sources of power in nature for the use and convenience of man. So it's very grand, and it fits in, and it's all focused on the project. It's all focused on identifying the right, the right potential solution. What are the options? What's the best solution? And can you demonstrate that? But you're absolutely right. The way that we work today, it's all people generated. It's all, there's a very empathetic thread that runs through the way that we do our work today. Back on that utility part, it isn't, can you deliver the project in the best way? It's really helping, understand how the utilities today, the utility owners are really focused on how do you pick the right project? What do you run to failure? There are certain assets that you really want to go, no, I'm gonna have that asset in the ground and I want to run it for its full life cycle. We're going to look at operating and maintenance costs more than we've ever looked at before. We're going to look at the drive to a pump. So the pump motor and the way that it connects in with the with the drive, so the motor control center, that efficiency over the life cycle will dwarf any capital cost. So really, if you're going to apply empathy, you want to be looking for the owner. It isn't just capital costs of doing a project and putting in a perfect unit. It's now about how does everything run and what does the life cycle look like? What does the operation and maintenance look like? I got really excited on things like looking at, we had about 2,500 miles of piping in the system. And we basically had to plan out, all right, well, do you just take the oldest assets? Or how do you pick which section of pipe needs to be replaced and when? And so we really got into asset management. We really got into life cycle management. And I think engineering today is far more data-driven and empathy-driven, and is all about that people leadership that we were talking about before, having that wider discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%, Phil. I mean, and to me, I always tell PMs in the industry that the biggest misnomer in project management is that the word people is not in that phrase, project management. And especially when we're training like soon to be project managers, what we try to tell them in that transition of project manager, you have to remember you're now going to not only manage projects, but lead people, right? You're going to have to be doing both of those things. And so we need to remember that. Karen, just wondering if there's anything on that you could talk about just in terms of your approach to clients and building the relationships and connecting with them early on in projects that you could share.
Yeah, and you mentioned the three-legged stool from a project management perspective. We actually use it from a program perspective. We say people, process, and system. So we never forget the people element and how important most of these projects, programs, mega projects are driven by stakeholders or multiple entities that have to work together to consistently deliver this project or the multiple projects. So communication and stakeholder engagement is actually critical, and it probably sometimes doesn't get enough attention it deserves. And Phil and I were doing some of our PMP credential training, and a team in the UK just came out with a podcast and a training on why mega projects fail. And there was a whole element around stakeholder engagement and communication. And if you don't engage the right people at the right time and make them feel valuable in the process and heard in the process, I think that is a risk of failure. I think we have such smart engineers and technical team members like architects and planners and scientists and all the people that you need to actually physically, bring this asset to life. But sometimes we forget about the softer part of people element and the communication component, right? Because these projects span, as Phil said, multiple years, multiple jurisdictions, which means it's likely you're going to have a change in leadership or a change in team members, or you're going to have to cross over between, different utilities or different stakeholders, different decision makers, and you really have to bring everyone on board to come on for that one mission, that one driver that we're all working towards to get to the end successfully.
Yeah, so important. And we try to talk a lot about how in the beginning stages of a project, the initiating or planning phases, you're really identifying all of those stakeholders and kind of understanding how closely you're going to need to manage and communicate with them depending on their interest and their influence in your projects, but also reinforcing that it's dynamic, right? Just things are going to change over the life of your project. Someone may become either more influential or more interested in a project, and then you got to manage them more closely, or the board changes or something happens. And so it's not a set it and forget it type of thing. Really, very few things are in project management, but especially stakeholders, because your stakeholders, if you jump into your project too quickly without thinking through all of your stakeholders, that can really come back to kind of bite you on your projects. All right, so just got a couple last questions here. And Phil, I'll go back to you for this one, but both of you can certainly chime in on this one. What is Stanley's approach to program management, and what program approaches have you seen that encourage kind of operational and project delivery efficiencies? Efficiency is a big term today in our world.
I think, focusing on, there's a couple of elements, well begun is half done is a saying that someone told me early in my career. And it really is true. If you get the planning in place, that really helps for the life cycle. Like Karen said, I mean, these could be multi-year project or program endeavors. So you really have to invest in that planning and set your systems up. And then start with the end in mind is the second, focus, that you're really clear on what the target is. The target may change, but the objectives, what does success look like? I think are really important to be thinking about right at the beginning. As Karen said, we really think through a couple of things like organizational elements. There's people, roles, responsibilities, culture. One size does not fit all, and you have to work out how you're blending. If you're in an integrated team, that's really important. Also, the processes, we look at in terms of these standard delivery processes. In cases, those have to be adapted for various end users. And so you're really clear on that decision-making framework, that kind of planning that moves forward. And then Karen talked about it earlier, but the systems that we put in place, so it's really transparent. Are you on or off plan? What triggers a decision? Can you see real-time data? So those systems become really important. So those are the three things: the organizational elements, the processes, the systems. So we'll set those up very early at the beginning. And I think that strong kind of management right at the beginning of a project then allows you to be successful later on.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times we see the low-hanging fruit for an organization to improve their project management practices is a really good kickoff meeting and a really good ramp up to get your project started, because I can't tell you how many companies we start talking to about project management. They're like, well, we don't really do kickoff meetings on all of our projects. And we're just like, oh, no, like that's how you set the course. So, and kind of going back to what you said, Phil, I mean, we kind of sometimes simplify it by saying you need to kind of ask the client, what does done mean on this project? When we're done, what does it look like? Right? Like if you're not clear on that, then you may not be going and aiming at the same target as they are. And that presents kind of a major problem. So that's something that we need to kind of keep in mind as we go through our projects here. All right. So I have one last question. I'll ask it of both of you, and I'll start with you, Karen. Just generally speaking, from your experience as a project manager in the industry, what are some kind of final pieces of advice that you would give to, engineering professionals that are really looking to get more into project management and become great project managers? So what's kind of like an overall thing that has stood out to you in your career?
So I'll see if I can answer this correctly, because I know Phil's great at this, but there are certain attributes we look for when we're putting together a team, like Phil said, right? So we look at the client organization, we look at type of asset that has to be built, or the types of assets that have to be built, the project, the portfolio of projects. And when we look at attributes of an individual, resourcing these roles on programs and getting tasks completed, we look for flexibility. Does the individual have the flexibility to adjust their prioritization of tasks? Right? We've talked about that already. We look for strong communication skills in an individual, given the multiple stakeholders that are involved. Team members should have the ability to clearly express and exchange information and have some of those difficult dialogues that will come up over the years of the life cycle of the project. And then lastly, we look for patience. So there's certain attributes we look for, right? Do you have the ability to endure the difficult times, right? There's ebbs and flows on programs. There's a honeymoon period, then there's some difficult periods, and there's some setbacks, and everyone has to be calm and collected during those setbacks. So there's some specific attributes we look for. And as I look back on my career, I've tried to practice, getting better at them. And I've also tried to really understand my weaknesses and my strengths and how to better prioritize my learning and my strengthening of certain skill set, especially if I want to continue in the world of program management and delivering these large mega projects. So as a technical engineer, a planner, a scientist, I would just say there are definitely some attributes that a project manager should have. And I would look to a mentor or someone in the industry and ask them for honest feedback so that they can really hone in on those skills that are needed.
That's great. That's awesome. Phil, how about you?
Yeah. On a similar theme, it's interesting because Karen and I are very different, even though, we may sound alike, but, we're very different. I think there is an art to recognizing early. If someone could recognize early that a project team or, a team in whatever we do, there's an art to bringing the competitive strengths that people bring together. So Karen and I are very good at reading each other and knowing which one will pick up a particular problem because we know each other's competitive strengths, really, really clearly. I early on started to watch people a lot. So on the team, just see how people operate, see how they perform. I saw early on that the leadership that I wanted to mirror in my career was very calm in a crisis. I was watching that behavior, and so I try and emulate that because that calmness when issues are tense, I think is a real skill set, and people resonate with that. I think there's an art in succinctly briefing and being able to summarize an issue and a problem. And I think being able to, focus on that again early in your career, that we can all hit the technical and we can go down to levels that will scare most normal people. But I think there is truly an art in, can you succinctly summarize a problem, and then probably embrace that principle of, you are going to be asked questions in the future, and you're going to have to work backwards, and you won't be able to recognize why you made a particular decision as clearly. And so that rigor in documenting and process and following the systems throughout the whole team is really important, because there are so many times I've been asked to go, well, why a year ago did you make that decision? And recreating why that decision was made is really hard. But if you've got a very good documentation trail and a team that all follows the systems, makes it so easy and makes the team, look as strong as they actually are. So a couple of things. Last one, maybe, Anthony, I would say read a lot. That curious kind of trait, I think, is really helpful. I draw on a lot of examples. So I've got quite a large toolbox to be able to draw from, because there is no one book, there's no one answer. And so I've got a lot of tools in my toolbox for different situations, and boy, can you see a lot of different situations in the careers that we pick. So a lot of fun.
That's great. And really, I think a big takeaway from both of your answers there for me is like self-awareness, right? Like understanding some of your strengths, understanding some of your weaknesses, and then, getting information where you have weaknesses, reading, mentoring, and trying to fill in the gaps there, and continue to evolve as a PM, like throughout your career, because you have to keep evolving regardless of what level you're at in your organization. So Karen Ditz, Phil Tunnah, Stanley Consultants, I want to thank you both for spending some time with us here on the Engineering Project Management Podcast. We really appreciate your insights and, giving some of your kind of PM wisdom back to the community. Thank you to both of you.
Well, thanks. It's been fun.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Phil and Karen today. They have a wealth of knowledge around project management, and I really liked their emphasis on understanding the clients' and other stakeholders' needs and being adaptable as a PM. And I hope that you can practice some of what they preached in this episode. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to our channel here. We do put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers and other technical professionals become great project managers. I'll see you next week.